The dining room buzzed with that particular energy that comes from mixing wine, family politics, and my mother-in-law's famous lasagna. I sat at the head of our mahogany table, the one Fina had insisted we buy when I got promoted to senior structural engineer, watching the circus unfold around me. "Pierce, you really outdid yourself with the renovations," gushed Mrs. Patterson from next door, gesturing at the crown molding I'd installed last spring. "This place looks like something out of Better Homes and Gardens." I smiled and nodded, taking a sip of the Chianti that cost more than my first car. "Thanks, Helen. Just trying to keep up with Fina's vision." My wife beamed from the other end of the table, her auburn hair catching the light from the chandelier she'd special ordered from some boutique in Chicago. At 39, Fina still turned heads, and she knew it. Tonight she wore that emerald dress that made her eyes pop, the same dress she'd worn to her company Christmas party 6 months ago. "Speaking of visions," Fina's mother chimed in, "when are you two going to give us some grandchildren? You've been married 8 years now." The question hung in the air like smoke from a grease fire. I felt my sister Maddie tense beside me. She knew. She was the only one who knew about the procedure I'd had 3 years ago, the one Fina had pushed for when we thought 2 incomes and travel were more important than diapers and college funds. "Actually," Fina said, rising from her chair with theatrical flair, "that's something we wanted to talk to everyone about tonight." My fork paused halfway to my mouth. The marinara sauce suddenly tasted like copper pennies. "We have an announcement," she continued, her voice carrying that sing-song quality she used when presenting quarterly reports to the board at Meridian Healthcare, where she worked as HR director. The table fell silent except for the soft jazz playing from the speakers I'd wired throughout the house. 8 faces turned toward my wife like sunflowers following the sun. My brother-in-law Rick leaned forward, his beer forgotten. Fina's father adjusted his glasses, the same ones he'd worn to intimidate me when I'd asked for his daughter's hand in marriage. "I'm pregnant," Fina announced, placing her hands on her still flat stomach. The eruption was immediate. Chairs scraped against hardwood as people jumped up to embrace her. Mrs. Patterson squealed like a teenager at a concert. Fina's mother burst into tears, the happy kind, not the kind she'd cried when Fina told her we were eloping to Vegas instead of having the cathedral wedding she'd dreamed of. "Oh, honey, this is wonderful," Maddie exclaimed, though I caught the confusion in her eyes as she glanced at me. "When did you find out?" "Just yesterday," Fina replied, accepting congratulations like a queen receiving tribute. "I wanted to wait until we were all together to share the news." I sat perfectly still, watching the celebration swirl around me like a tornado. The smart home system I'd installed last year captured everything: the laughter, the tears, the way Dr. Miles Cutter from Fina's office raised his wine glass a fraction of a second before everyone else, as if he'd been expecting this moment. Miles. Tall, athletic, with the kind of silver-streaked temples that made women forget he was married. He'd joined Meridian 6 months ago as the new department head, and Fina had mentioned him exactly 47 times since then. I'd counted. "This calls for champagne," Rick declared, already heading toward our wine fridge. "None for me," Fina laughed, playing the part perfectly. "Doctor's orders." The room buzzed with questions about due dates and baby names and nursery themes. I listened to it all with the detached interest of an engineer studying structural failure, noting the stress points, the places where the facade might crack. Finally, when the initial excitement died down to a manageable roar, I stood up. The movement caught everyone's attention, and the room gradually quieted until only Sinatra's voice filled the space. "This is certainly a surprise," I said, my voice steady as the foundation I'd helped design for the new hospital downtown. "Should we tell them I had a vasectomy 3 years ago?" The silence that followed was the kind you hear in the seconds before a building collapses. Complete, total, absolute. Fina's face went through a series of micro-expressions, surprise, panic, calculation, before settling on a nervous laugh. "Pierce, what are you talking about? You're being silly." But nobody else was laughing. Helen Patterson's mouth hung open like a bass gasping for air. Rick stood frozen by the wine fridge, champagne bottle in hand. Fina's parents exchanged a look that could have powered the house for a week. I reached into my jacket pocket and pulled out my phone, scrolling to the folder I'd labeled medical records. 3 years of planning, 3 years of documentation, 3 years of hoping I'd never need to use it. November 15th, 2021, I said, reading from the screen. Dr. Andrew Chen, Midwest Fertility Specialists. Bilateral vasectomy, completed without complications. Follow-up appointment December 20th showed successful procedure. Would you like me to share the photos? Fina's laugh turned shrill. This is ridiculous. You're obviously confused about the dates. Stress can affect memory, you know. I'm an engineer, Fina. I don't get confused about dates. I turned to address the room. I also don't get confused about phone records, credit card statements, or the fact that my wife has been working late with Dr. Cutter here every Tuesday and Thursday for the past 4 months. Miles Cutter, who'd been trying to blend into the wallpaper, suddenly found his wine very interesting. His wife Sandra, a thin woman who taught yoga and posted inspirational quotes on social media, stared at him with dawning horror. "Pierce, stop this," Fina hissed. "You're embarrassing yourself." "Am I?" I scrolled through more files on my phone. "Because I've got hotel receipts from the Marriott downtown. Room 412, charged to your corporate card. Same room, same day, every week. Funny thing about corporate cards, they keep detailed records." The room had become a tableau of shock and awkward silence. Maddie looked like she wanted to applaud and cry at the same time. Fina's father had gone pale beneath his tan. Her mother clutched her pearls like they might save her from drowning in scandal. "This is insane," Fina said, but her voice had lost its confidence. "You're having some kind of breakdown." "The only thing breaking down here is your story." I pocketed my phone and looked around the table at our guests. People we'd shared holidays with. People who'd celebrated our anniversary just last month. People who thought they knew us. "I think," I said quietly, "it's time for dessert." The exodus began immediately. Helen Patterson mumbled something about checking on her cat and fled through the front door. Rick set down the champagne and grabbed his wife's coat without a word. Within 10 minutes, our dinner party had dissolved like sugar in rain. Only Maddie remained, helping me clear plates while Fina locked herself in our bedroom upstairs. The sound of her voice carried through the walls, sharp, urgent phone calls that I didn't need to hear to understand. "How long have you known?" Maddie asked, scraping lasagna into the garbage disposal. "Suspected? About 3 months. Knew for certain? About 3 weeks." I loaded wine glasses into the dishwasher, each clink echoing in the suddenly empty house. Amazing what you can learn when you actually pay attention. My sister studied me with the same intensity she'd used to dissect frogs in high school biology. At 37, Maddie had never married, claiming she'd learned everything she needed to know about men from watching our father. She worked as a forensic accountant, which meant she had a professional appreciation for hidden patterns and buried secrets. "What are you going to do?" she asked. "I haven't decided yet." That was a lie. I'd been planning for weeks, running calculations in my head like stress analysis on a bridge design. But I'm not going to make it easy for her. Upstairs, a door slammed. Footsteps pounded down the hallway, then down the stairs. Fina appeared in the kitchen doorway, her emerald dress wrinkled, her carefully applied makeup smeared. "We need to talk," she announced. Maddie took the hint. "I'll call you tomorrow," she said, squeezing my shoulder as she passed. "And Pierce, whatever you decide to do, I've got your back." After she left, Fina and I faced each other across the kitchen island like gunfighters at high noon. The granite surface between us might as well have been the Grand Canyon. "You humiliated me in front of our friends," she said. "I told the truth. There's a difference." "The truth?" Her voice rose to a pitch that made the wine glasses ring. "You made me look like some kind of cheater." Aren't you? The question hung between us like a blade. Fina's face cycled through emotions: anger, indignation, calculation. Finally, she settled on wounded innocence. I can't believe you'd think that about me. About us. Then explain the pregnancy. Medical procedures fail sometimes. Maybe the vasectomy didn't take. I pulled out my phone again and showed her a different screen. Post-procedure testing every 6 months for 3 years. 0 sperm count. Every single time. Dr. Chen was very thorough. Fina stared at the medical reports like they were written in hieroglyphics. This is impossible. What's impossible is that you thought I wouldn't figure it out. I scrolled to another folder. Want to see the credit card records for Victoria's Secret? The charges started right around the time Dr. Cutter joined your company. Interesting coincidence. You've been spying on me? I've been paying attention to my own financial statements. Amazing concept, I know. She tried a different approach, moving around the island toward me. Pierce, honey, I know this looks bad, but there's an explanation. I'm sure there is. Does it involve the text messages you've been deleting? Or maybe the late nights at the office when the building security logs show you leaving at 5:30? Fina stopped moving. How do you know about security logs? I designed the building's structural systems, remember? I still have contacts there. Another lie, but a useful one. Actually, I'd gotten the information from Eric, my best friend who ran a private security firm. Former cops had ways of finding things out. You're sick, she whispered. This is stalking. This is marriage. Or what's left of it. Fina's phone buzzed. She glanced at it, and I saw something flicker across her face. Relief, maybe, or desperation. I'm going to stay at my mother's tonight, she said. When you come to your senses, when you remember that you love me, call me. Take your time, I replied. I'll be here. She grabbed her purse and keys from the counter. At the doorway, she turned back. This isn't over, Pierce. No, I agreed. It's not. After she left, I poured myself 3 fingers of bourbon and sat in my home office, staring at the computer screen. The smart home system I'd installed captured everything: audio, video, motion sensors, even temperature changes. It was designed to make life convenient, to anticipate our needs. Tonight, it had served a different purpose. I opened the security application and scrolled through the last 6 months of data. There it was, pattern after pattern of deception. Fina leaving early on Tuesdays and Thursdays, coming home late with elevated stress indicators from the biometric sensors. The system had been tracking her lies better than I had. My phone rang. Eric's name appeared on the screen. Heard you had an interesting dinner party, he said without preamble. News travels fast. Maddie called me, said you might need backup. Eric Kowalski had been my best friend since college, where we'd bonded over late-night study sessions and cheap beer. After graduation, he'd joined the police force while I went into engineering. Now he ran his own security consulting firm, helping people protect what mattered to them. What do you need? He asked. I looked around my office, at the degrees on the wall, the family photos that now seemed like evidence of a crime I hadn't known I was committing, the architectural drawings for projects that had kept me working late while my wife was busy with projects of her own. I need to know everything, I said. Every detail, every lie, every secret. If I'm going to war, I want superior intelligence. Consider it done. But Pierce? Yeah? Be careful how far you're willing to go. Revenge has a way of changing people. I hung up and turned back to the computer screen. Outside, rain began pattering against the windows, and the smart house automatically adjusted the lighting to compensate for the dimmer conditions. The house was taking care of me, just like it always had. Maybe it was time to return the favor. The next morning, I woke up alone in a king-sized bed that suddenly felt too big and too empty. Fina's pillow still smelled like her perfume, something expensive that she'd started wearing about 6 months ago, another clue I'd missed in real time. I made coffee in the kitchen where last night's confrontation had played out, the scene now feeling like something from a movie I'd watched rather than lived. The smart house had already adjusted the temperature, opened the blinds, and started playing my usual morning playlist. Technology was so much more reliable than people. My phone buzzed with a text from Eric. "Package delivered to your office. Enjoy your reading." I drove to work through suburban streets lined with houses similar to mine. Two-story colonials with perfect lawns and secrets hidden behind vinyl siding. The engineering firm of Morrison, Keller and Associates occupied the third floor of a downtown office building I'd helped design 5 years ago. My office overlooked the river, with windows that faced east to catch the morning light. The package sat on my desk like a small bomb. Inside, Eric had compiled everything: phone records, credit card statements, hotel receipts, even photographs taken with a telephoto lens. Professional surveillance, all perfectly legal, all devastating in its thoroughness. I spread the contents across my desk like an engineer reviewing blueprints. The pattern was clear once you knew what to look for. Every Tuesday and Thursday for 4 months, Fina had left work early and driven to the Marriott downtown. The same room number, the same duration, the same companion. Dr. Miles Cutter, married father of 2, department head at Meridian Healthcare, and apparently the father of my wife's unborn child. The photographs were particularly illuminating. Fina and Miles entering the hotel separately, but within minutes of each other. Fina leaving with her hair different, her clothes slightly disheveled. Miles checking his reflection in car windows like a teenager after his first date. My desk phone rang. "Pierce, it's Janet from reception. Your wife is here to see you." I looked out my office window and saw Fina's silver BMW in the parking lot below. She'd driven straight from her mother's house, probably hoping to catch me off guard, to control the narrative before I had time to think. "Send her up," I said. Fina appeared in my doorway 5 minutes later, wearing a navy business suit and the expression of someone about to deliver bad news to shareholders. She'd reapplied her makeup and styled her hair, but I could see the stress in the tight lines around her eyes. "We need to talk," she said, closing the door behind her. I quickly gathered the surveillance materials and slipped them into a desk drawer. "By all means." She sat in the chair across from my desk, the same chair where clients discussed load-bearing requirements and foundation specifications. Now it hosted a different kind of structural analysis. "I've been thinking about last night," she began, "about what you said, what you think you know. I don't think anything. I know everything. Pierce, listen to me. I made a mistake. One mistake. One moment of weakness. It doesn't mean anything." I leaned back in my chair, studying her like a blueprint with questionable measurements. "One mistake? For 4 months? How did you—" She caught herself, but too late. "How did I know it was 4 months? Because I'm not stupid, Fina. Because I pay attention to details. It's what I do for a living." She shifted in her seat, crossing and uncrossing her legs. "It's over. Whatever you think was happening, it's finished. We can work through this." "Is it Miles's baby?" The question hit her like a physical blow. She actually flinched, her carefully composed expression cracking for just a moment before reassembling itself. "That's a horrible thing to ask." "It's a simple question. Yes or no?" "I don't know," she whispered. And for the first time since I'd known her, Fina looked genuinely vulnerable. "I honestly don't know." The admission hung in the air between us like smoke from an electrical fire. I felt something cold settle in my chest. Not anger exactly, but something harder and more permanent. "Here's what's going to happen," I said quietly. "You're going to go home and pack your things. You're going to move in with your mother or Miles or whoever will have you. And you're going to stay away from me until our lawyers figure out how to divide 8 years of marriage." "Pierce, please." "I'm not finished." My voice carried the authority I used when explaining why a building design wouldn't work, why the client's vision would result in structural collapse. You're also going to explain to everyone who was at dinner last night exactly what happened. The truth, not some sanitized version that makes you look like a victim. I can't do that. It would ruin everything. Everything is already ruined. The only question now is whether you're going to have any dignity left when the dust settles. Fina stood up, her professional composure finally cracking completely. You're being cruel. I'm being practical. It's the difference between a controlled demolition and letting a building collapse on its own. She stared at me for a long moment, maybe seeing me clearly for the first time in years. I don't know who you are anymore. I'm the same person I've always been. You just weren't paying attention. After she left, I sat alone in my office, looking out at the city I'd helped build. Somewhere out there, Dr. Miles Cutter was probably having a very different conversation with his wife. Somewhere else, Fina was calling her mother or her lawyer or her lover, trying to figure out how to minimize the damage. But damage, once it started, had a way of spreading. I'd seen it in buildings, in bridges, in carefully engineered structures that looked solid from the outside but were rotting from within. I pulled out my phone and scrolled through my contacts until I found the number I was looking for. Morrison, Keller and Associates, I said when the receptionist answered. This is Pierce Eldro. I need to schedule a consultation with a divorce attorney, and I need it today. The house always knows when the foundation is compromised. The question is whether you repair it or start over. I was starting to think demolition might be the better option. 3 weeks later, I stood in my kitchen, preparing for what would either be the most brilliant or most catastrophic dinner party in suburban history. The smart house hummed around me, every system calibrated for the evening ahead. Motion sensors tracked my movements, cameras recorded everything, and the whole setup was about to become the stage for Fina's final performance. She'd moved back in 2 days ago, claiming she wanted to work things out and rebuild our marriage. What she really wanted was to control the narrative, to convince our friends and family that I'd overreacted, that we were just going through a rough patch that could be smoothed over with couples therapy and time. I'd let her believe it was working. The flowers look beautiful, she said, arranging the centerpieces she'd ordered from the same florist who'd done our wedding. Just like old times. Just like old times, I agreed, checking the wine selection. I'd invited everyone who'd been at the pregnancy announcement dinner, plus a few additional guests. Miles Cutter and his wife Sandra, Fina's entire family, my sister Maddie, who knew what was coming, and Eric, who'd helped me prepare for tonight like a military operation. The surveillance equipment was all perfectly legal, my own security system, recording in my own house, with signs posted at the entrances as required by law. Everything Eric had taught me about evidence collection, everything I'd learned about structural engineering, everything I knew about timing and pressure points, all focused on this single evening. I'm so glad we're doing this, Fina continued, adjusting her dress, the same emerald one she'd worn 3 weeks ago. It shows everyone that we're stronger than ever. I smiled and nodded, playing the part of the reconciled husband. Inside, I felt like a demolition expert watching the final countdown. The guests began arriving at 7. Helen Patterson brought her famous potato salad and gossip about the new neighbors. Rick and his wife came bearing wine and carefully neutral expressions. Fina's parents arrived precisely on time, her mother clutching a gift bag that probably contained baby clothes. Miles and Sandra Cooter were the last to arrive. I watched through the security cameras as they sat in their car for 3 minutes before coming to the door, clearly having an argument. Sandra looked like she'd been crying. Miles looked like a man walking to his execution. "Dr. Cutter?" I said, opening the door with a smile that felt like broken glass. "So glad you could make it. And Sandra, you look lovely." Sandra managed a weak smile. Miles shook my hand with the enthusiasm of someone touching a live wire. "Thanks for inviting us, Pierce. Fina speaks so highly of you." "She speaks highly of you too," I replied. Very highly. Dinner proceeded like a carefully choreographed dance. I played the perfect host, keeping wine glasses full and conversation flowing. Fina basked in the attention, accepting congratulations on our reconciliation and fielding questions about the pregnancy with practiced ease. I waited until dessert was served, chocolate cake from the bakery where Fina and I had ordered our wedding cake 8 years ago. The symbolism wasn't lost on me. Before we dig in, I said, standing at the head of the table, I wanted to say something. The room quieted, all attention focused on me. Fina smiled up at me, probably expecting a romantic speech about second chances and renewed love. 3 weeks ago, in this very room, my wife announced that she was pregnant. It was certainly a surprise, given that I'd had a vasectomy 3 years earlier. The temperature in the room seemed to drop 10 degrees. Fina's smile froze in place. Since then, I've learned a lot about surprises, about the things people do when they think no one is watching, about the difference between marriage and performance art. I pulled out my phone and connected it to the smart TV mounted on the dining room wall. I thought you might all be interested in seeing what I've learned. The screen flickered to life, showing the hotel security footage Eric had obtained through his professional contacts. There was Fina, entering the Marriott downtown. There was Miles, following 5 minutes later. The timestamp showed last Tuesday, 2 days after she'd moved back home to work on our marriage. The room erupted in shocked gasps and nervous whispers. Sandra Cutter made a sound like a wounded animal. Fina's mother dropped her wine glass, sending red liquid spreading across the white tablecloth like evidence at a crime scene. "This is fake," Fina said, her voice high and desperate. "He's manipulating the footage. This is some kind of revenge fantasy." I switched to the next video, phone footage from the hotel restaurant, showing Fina and Miles at a corner table, his hand covering hers, her laughing at something he'd whispered. Then another clip, from the parking garage, showing them kissing beside his BMW. "I'm particularly fond of this next one," I said, advancing to footage from our own security system. "This is from last Thursday, right here in our house." The screen showed our guest bedroom, where Fina and Miles were locked in an embrace, his hands tangled in her hair, her dress partially unzipped. The audio was crystal clear, every whispered endearment, every promise about their future together, every lie about how she was going to leave me as soon as the divorce was final. The silence that followed was deafening. Fina sat frozen in her chair, her face cycling through emotions like a broken traffic light. Miles looked like he was about to vomit all over his dinner plate. "The really interesting part," I continued, "is what they said about the baby." I pressed play on the audio file Eric had enhanced from the bedroom footage. Miles's voice filled the room. "Are you sure it's mine?" And Fina's response, "Does it matter? Pierce will pay for everything either way." Sandra Cutter stood up so fast, her chair toppled backward. "You piece of garbage!" she screamed at her husband. "You absolute piece of garbage!" She grabbed her purse and headed for the door, pausing only to look back at Fina. "I hope it was worth it. I hope destroying 2 marriages was worth it." The exodus began immediately. Fina's parents left without a word, her mother sobbing into her father's shoulder. Rick and his wife followed, muttering apologies they didn't mean. Helen Patterson practically ran for her car, probably already composing the text messages that would spread this story through the neighborhood by morning. Within 10 minutes, only Maddie, Eric, Fina, Miles and I remained in the dining room. The chocolate cake sat untouched, candles still burning like a memorial to something that had died. "Well," I said, turning off the TV and pocketing my phone. "Who wants coffee?" Miles finally found his voice. "Pierce, I can explain." "No need," I interrupted. "The explanation is pretty clear. You're a cheater, she's a liar, and I'm the fool who believed in marriage vows." Fina stood up on shaking legs. "You planned this, all of it. The reconciliation, the dinner party, everything." "I'm an engineer," I said. "I plan everything." She stared at me with something that might have been respect if it weren't mixed with pure hatred. "You're not the man I married." "No," I agreed. "I'm better." Miles and Fina left together, probably to compare notes on how thoroughly their lives had just imploded. Miles's medical practice would be ruined by morning. Hospital boards didn't look kindly on department heads who impregnated their subordinates. Fina's career in HR was similarly finished. It's hard to enforce workplace conduct policies when you're the poster child for inappropriate relationships. After they left, Maddie helped me clear the table, while Eric checked the security system recordings. "Think they'll try to fight the divorce?" Maddie asked. "With what?" I replied. "I've got enough evidence to bury them both in court. Besides, Miles will be too busy dealing with his own divorce to help her with mine." Eric looked up from his laptop. "Everything's backed up to multiple servers. Even if they try to claim the footage is fake, the metadata proves it's authentic." I nodded, feeling strangely empty now that the evening was over. The house felt different, cleaner somehow, like a building that had been purged of structural defects. "What now?" Maddie asked. I looked around the dining room where I'd shared 8 years of meals, holidays, and ordinary evenings with a woman I'd thought I knew. Tomorrow, the lawyers would start dividing our life into assets and debts. The house would probably have to be sold. Everything we'd built together would be reduced to line items on legal documents. "Now," I said, "I figure out how to build something new." Outside, rain began falling against the windows, and the smart house automatically adjusted the lighting and temperature. The system was taking care of me, just like it always had. Some foundations could be repaired. Others needed to be completely replaced. I was finally ready to start over. The legal proceedings moved faster than I'd expected. When you have video evidence of adultery, hotel receipts, and recorded confessions, divorce attorneys tend to work with unusual efficiency. Fina hired the most expensive lawyer in the city, but even he couldn't argue with footage of his client planning to defraud her husband. I kept the house. Fina got her clothes, her car, and a settlement that wouldn't buy her lunch at the restaurants she used to frequent. The judge, a stern woman in her 60s who'd probably seen every variation of marital betrayal, made it clear that adultery still carried consequences in her courtroom. Miles Cutter wasn't as fortunate. Sandra took him for everything he had, plus half of everything he might ever have. The hospital board terminated his contract after the footage went viral on social media. Apparently, someone at the dinner party had been recording with their phone and decided to share. His medical license was under review, his reputation was destroyed, and the last I heard, he was working at an urgent care clinic in a strip mall outside the city. But the real satisfaction came from watching the social demolition unfold. 3 months after the dinner party, I ran into Helen Patterson at the grocery store. She practically sprinted down the cereal aisle to intercept me, her eyes bright with the anticipation of someone about to deliver premium gossip. "Pierce, how are you holding up?" "Just fine, Helen. Thanks for asking." "Have you heard about Fina?" She leaned closer, lowering her voice to a conspiratorial whisper. "She had to move back in with her parents. Can you imagine? At 39 years old?" I could imagine it perfectly. The house Fina's parents had been so proud of, the one they'd used to impress their friends at the country club, was now ground zero for neighborhood scandal. Their daughter, the successful HR director with the perfect marriage, had become the cautionary tale mothers told their daughters about the dangers of infidelity. "And the baby?" Helen continued, unable to contain her excitement. "She lost it. Miscarriage at 12 weeks, probably for the best considering everything." I felt a complicated mix of emotions at that news. Relief, certainly, but also something that might have been sadness for the child who would never exist, who had been conceived in deception and lost in shame. "That's unfortunate," I said, because it was the appropriate response. "Oh, but that's not even the best part," Helen pressed on. "Miles Cutter's wife? She's writing a book about the whole thing, a memoir about marriage and betrayal and finding strength after devastation. She's got a publisher interested in everything. I smiled at that. Sandra Cutter, the quiet yoga instructor who'd seemed so fragile that night, had found her voice in the ruins of her marriage. Good for her. Well, I said, everyone deserves a second chapter. What about you? Helen asked. Are you dating anyone? Because my niece just moved here from Chicago and she's lovely. Divorced, no children, works in marketing. I'm taking things slow, I replied, focusing on work, on myself, learning to enjoy my own company again. That was true. The house felt different now, lighter somehow, like a building that had been stripped of unnecessary weight. I'd redecorated, removing the expensive furniture Fina had chosen and replacing it with pieces that actually felt comfortable. The smart home system still monitored everything, but now it was protecting something worth protecting. I'd also started dating, though not Helen's niece. Her name was Rebecca, and she was a structural engineer at a competing firm. We'd met at a conference on sustainable building practices, bonding over shared frustrations with clients who wanted to ignore physics in favor of aesthetics. Rebecca was everything Fina wasn't. Direct instead of manipulative, honest instead of calculating, interested in building things rather than tearing them down. She knew about my divorce, had heard the story through professional networks, but she didn't treat me like a victim or a cautionary tale. She treated me like a man who'd learned from his mistakes and was ready to make better choices. The foundation has to be solid, she'd said on our third date when I'd explained my trust issues. Everything else can be rebuilt, but if the foundation is compromised, the whole structure fails. She understood. That's what I'd been missing in my marriage. Understanding. Fina had seen me as a provider, a status symbol, a means to an end. Rebecca saw me as a partner. 6 months after the divorce was finalized, I got a text message from an unknown number. The area code was local, but I didn't recognize it. I know you probably don't want to hear from me, but I wanted to apologize. For everything. I was selfish and cruel, and you deserved better. I hope you're happy. F. I stared at the message for a long time, considering my response. Part of me wanted to ignore it, to let Fina disappear into the past where she belonged, but another part, the engineer in me who believed in proper closure, wanted to respond. Finally, I typed back, "Apology accepted. I hope you find what you're looking for." She never replied, and I never heard from her again. That evening, I cooked dinner for Rebecca in the kitchen, where my marriage had ended. We ate at the same table where Fina had announced her pregnancy, where I'd delivered my calculated response, where everything had changed in the span of a single sentence. "Penny for your thoughts," Rebecca said, noticing my distraction. "Just thinking about foundations," I replied, "about the difference between what looks solid and what actually is solid." She smiled, understanding exactly what I meant. The best foundations are the ones you can't see. They do their job quietly, without fanfare, holding everything else up. I raised my wine glass, a simple Pinot Grigio, nothing expensive or pretentious. To solid foundations. To solid foundations, she agreed. Outside, the smart house monitored the perimeter, adjusted the temperature, and kept watch over everything I'd rebuilt. The system was still taking care of me, but now I was taking care of myself too. Some marriages end with lawyers and mediators and bitter negotiations over who gets the good china. Others end with public humiliation and social exile and the complete destruction of everything you thought you knew about your life. Mine had ended with the truth. And the truth, as it turned out, was the best foundation of all. The house always knows when something is wrong. The question is whether you're willing to listen to what it's trying to tell you. I'd finally learned to listen.